Have you ever felt a sudden pull, like something was trying to stop you? Picture this. You're about to leave home, bags packed, plans made, but something quiet inside you whispers, wait. What if that hesitation wasn't fear, but a message? Today's story is not fiction. It's a true account of what some call angel signs before tragedy. A moment when something invisible stepped in, when a quiet voice, a strange feeling, or a sudden change in routine became the difference between life and irreversible loss. It happened on a calm autumn morning to a family just like yours, a mother making breakfast, a father by the window, a child laughing on the floor. Everything ordinary until one small sign turned the day upside down. Was it chance or something divine? These stories challenge what we think we know, about faith, about intuition, about the invisible. They remind us that before the worst can happen, something greater might be watching, whispering, guiding us back to safety. Because sometimes it's not just luck. It's not just instinct, it's something else. Before the worst happens, sometimes the universe sends a sign. If you believe in guardian angels, fate, or simply want to hear real stories of life-changing moments, subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us for today's powerful story. There are moments in life that arrive so quietly you almost don't notice them until they've passed. But once they do, you can never forget. It was still early that morning. The sun hadn't fully climbed over the treetops, and the soft orange light filtered through the kitchen window like a quiet blessing. Emily stood by the counter, zipping the last suitcase. Everything was ready, snacks packed, Lily's favorite stuffed giraffe tucked safely in the back seat, and Daniel already loading the car outside with his easy, humming calm. It should have been a beautiful day, but something in the air had changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden. It was more like a stillness, a hush, the kind that creeps in unnoticed, like fog around your ankles. Emily only became aware of it when she realized the house had grown too quiet. "Lily?" she called softly. No reply. She turned and saw her daughter standing in the hallway, her small body frozen like a porcelain doll, her toy animals forgotten on the floor behind her. Her eyes, usually wide and dancing, were fixed on something Emily couldn't see. "Sweetheart?" Emily moved closer. "Are you okay?" Lily turned her head slowly, as if waking from a dream. Her voice was calm, too calm for a 5-year-old. "Mommy," she said, "the voices of light told me not to go today." Emily knelt down, smiling with a mixture of tenderness and confusion. "The voices of light?" she asked, brushing Lily's hair behind her ear. Lily nodded. Her fingers moved to her chest, resting gently over her heart. "They were soft," she said, "and golden. They didn't sound like people. They sounded like sunlight. They told me, 'Stay home, little one. Stay safe. Tell them not to go today.'" Emily's breath caught in her throat. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The refrigerator hummed in the background. The clock ticked on the wall. But the air, it felt heavier now, charged, as if time itself had paused, waiting. It would have been easy to laugh it off, to call it imagination. A dream. Kids say strange things all the time. But something in Lily's eyes stopped Emily from brushing it away. There was no trace of playfulness, no mischief. Just knowing. Emily reached out, her hands shaking just slightly, and held Lily's tiny fingers in her own. "Did they scare you?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Lily shook her head. "No, they felt warm, like when you hold me after a bad dream." From the other room, Daniel called, "Ready to go?" Emily didn't answer right away. She stood up slowly, heart beating in a strange rhythm she couldn't explain. Her eyes drifted toward the front door, toward the car parked on the driveway, waiting. Then a memory surfaced. one she hadn't thought about in years. When Emily was 7, her own mother had once told her, "Sometimes, when the world is too loud, angels whisper to the ones who still remember how to listen." And now, her daughter was whispering those same whispers back to her, without even knowing. She walked into the living room and called out to Daniel, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can we wait a bit? Maybe leave later?" He looked at her, puzzled. "Everything okay?" I just feel like we should stay, just for today." He raised an eyebrow, confused but trusting. "Sure, we can always go tomorrow." And just like that, the decision was made. The suitcases stayed by the door, the car keys were placed back on the counter, and Lily climbed into her mother's lap, wrapping her arms around her neck as if she knew, deep down, what they'd avoided. Later that afternoon, they would hear it on the news. A major accident on the interstate, a multi-car pileup caused by a sudden patch of black ice. The exact stretch of road they would have been driving on at the exact time they had planned to be there. Emily's hands trembled as she turned off the television. She couldn't speak. Daniel sank into the couch, silent, and Lily. She looked out the window, watching the sky, as if she already knew. Even now, years later, Emily still doesn't have the words to explain what happened that day. She's tried, but each time it feels too big, too sacred. How do you describe the moment the invisible speaks, not with thunder or storms, but through the stillness of a child's voice? She doesn't claim to understand angels, or fate, or what truly moved through their home that morning. But she knows this: it was real, and it saved them. Sometimes the voices don't shout, they whisper, and sometimes they choose the quietest soul in the room to carry the message that can change everything. Emily and Daniel stood there, suspended in a quiet neither of them knew how to break. Outside, the early autumn wind stirred the trees. Inside, something heavier moved, something that wrapped itself around the walls of their little home and whispered, "Listen." Daniel cleared his throat, trying to keep things light. "Maybe she's just nervous about the trip," he murmured to Emily, offering a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You know how kids are." But Emily didn't answer. Her gaze stayed fixed on Lily, who now sat cross-legged on the floor, gently stroking her stuffed giraffe as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet the weight in Emily's chest refused to lift. There was a stillness around her daughter, not the silence of a child lost in thought, but the hush of something sacred, something that didn't belong to this world. "Lily," Emily said, kneeling beside her again, her voice softer now, like a prayer. "Can you tell me one more time? What did the voices say?" Lily looked up, her eyes as clear as the morning sky outside. There was no fear in her expression, no confusion, just a calm that made Emily's skin prickle. "They were bright and warm," Lily said gently, "like they came from the sun. They told me to tell you not to go, that something was waiting on the road, something not good." The way she said it, so still, so sure, sent a quiet chill through the room. If she had cried or trembled, maybe it would have been easier to dismiss. But this peace was different. It felt like a message wrapped in light. Daniel crouched down next to them, resting a hand on Lily's shoulder. "And did they say anything else, sweetheart?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Lily thought for a moment. "No, just that. And they said it very softly, like they didn't want to scare me." Emily blinked back, an unexpected sting in her eyes. She didn't know why it was affecting her so deeply, but something in her soul, some quiet part she didn't always listen to, had started to stir. That part whispered, "This isn't pretend." The house, so full of mourning, chatter just minutes ago, had grown impossibly quiet. The ticking of the kitchen clock, the faint rustle of leaves outside. Even the hum of the fridge felt louder now, like the world was holding its breath. Emily glanced at Daniel. He was trying to be rational. She could see it in his eyes. He was weighing possibilities, calculating the odds that this was simply a coincidence, a child's imagination, a harmless story. But Emily didn't want to gamble with silence that felt holy. She reached for Daniel's hand and gripped it harder than she meant to. "What if this isn't just nerves?" she whispered. "What if she really heard something?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "You think this is what? A warning?" "I don't know," she replied honestly. "But something about it feels different, doesn't it?" He looked back at Lily, who was now humming to herself quietly, completely unbothered, as if she had already done what she was meant to do and left the rest in their hands. The serenity in her had a gravity of its own, and that, more than anything, was what shook Emily to her core. There's a kind of calm that doesn't come from not knowing. It comes from knowing something far beyond what should be possible, and not being afraid of it. Lily had that calm now, and somehow, deep down, Emily knew. It wasn't hers. It had been given. They sat at the kitchen table, mugs of untouched coffee between them, trying to pretend everything was normal. Daniel chuckled softly, shaking his head as if brushing the morning off like dust on his jacket. "Maybe she just had a weird dream," he said. "Kids say strange things all the time." Emily smiled, but it didn't reach her heart. There was something lingering behind her eyes, something she couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. Daniel reached for her hand. "Look, if it makes you feel better, we'll wait a bit. Let the morning traffic clear. No rush, right?" Emily nodded slowly, grateful but still unsettled. "Yeah, just a little longer." Outside, the light shifted. What had been a golden morning now felt colder, paler. Shadows stretched across the kitchen floor in thin, unnatural lines, and though the heater hummed softly, the air inside the house felt tense, like waiting. Lily wandered in and out of the room, dragging her little giraffe behind her by one leg. She wasn't playing, not really. Sometimes she'd stop near the hallway, tilting her head, listening to something that no one else could hear. Other times she'd whisper to herself words too soft to catch. She never raised her voice. She didn't cry or beg. But the silence she carried with her was louder than anything. It pressed into the room like a quiet warning. By 10:15 a.m., the house had fallen into a strange stillness. Emily sat near the window, her hands curled around her lukewarm mug, watching the leaves tremble outside. Daniel was halfway through folding the travel blanket they had planned to keep in the back seat. The moment felt both ordinary and not. Then the phone rang, a shrill sound, sharp against the hush. Daniel answered quickly, his tone still casual. "Hey, Jules, we're just—" But her voice cut him off, shaky, tight, barely holding together. "There's been a pile-up," she said, "on the I-5, near Olympia. It's bad, Danny, really bad, dozens of cars. I thought you were already on the road." For a beat, no one spoke. Emily turned to him, already knowing, from the sudden drain in his face, from the stillness that took hold of him, that something had happened. He sat down slowly, the phone still pressed to his ear. We delayed," he said quietly. "We stayed back." Jules exhaled, the sound breaking into a tremble. "Oh my God, I just had this feeling. I needed to call. I thought I was too late." Emily rose to her feet without thinking, walking toward the hallway. Lily stood there, barefoot, watching her, not afraid, not surprised. She opened her arms, and Emily knelt down, holding her daughter close, breathing in the soft scent of her hair, warm like sunlight, faintly sweet like the cinnamon toast they never ate that morning. Her heart pounded in a slow, heavy rhythm that no longer felt like fear. It felt like grace. Not a word passed between them. But something sacred had just touched their lives, and somehow Lily had known, not through logic, not through fear, but through a whisper of something greater. And now, that whisper echoed through every corner of their home, like the gentle ringing of unseen bells. The news fell over them like a wave of icy water, sudden, breath-stealing, absolute. Emily stood frozen in front of the television, her hands clutching the edge of the counter for balance. On the screen, live footage from the I-5 spilled out in jagged fragments. Flashing lights, twisted metal, smoke rising in delicate spirals into the pale mid-morning sky. Emergency crews moved between wrecked vehicles, their faces grim, their urgency palpable. A tanker had lost control, they said. A chain. Reaction followed, fast, brutal, and without warning. Dozens of cars, multiple injuries, some too severe to speak of. But Emily didn't need the details. She didn't need the reporters' voices or the scrolling text at the bottom of the screen. She only needed one thought, one unbearable truth, and it rang in her head like a bell. That's where we were supposed to be. At that exact hour, on that exact road. Daniel lowered himself onto the edge of the couch, as if his legs could no longer carry the weight of what hadn't happened. He didn't speak, he didn't move. His eyes were wide and far away, watching something only he could see, a shadow of what could have been. Emily felt the color drain from her face. Her heart thudded in her chest, but her body was motionless. The air around her shifted, thick, charged, holy. It was as if something unseen had just passed through the room. A presence, a breath of the divine. Then Lily walked in. Her bare feet padded softly across the wooden floor, quiet as morning light. She didn't look afraid. She didn't look confused. She simply climbed into her mother's lap with the calm grace of someone who already knew how the story would unfold. She rested her head on Emily's chest, tiny fingers wrapping gently around her sleeve, and then she spoke, not like a child guessing, but like someone remembering. "The voices told me to keep us home," she said softly. "They said it wasn't our time to leave yet." Emily felt her breath catch. She looked down at her daughter, so small, so innocent, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be given a second chance without ever taking the first step. Lily hadn't warned them out of fear. She hadn't begged or cried. She had simply passed on a message, one spoken in light, wrapped in warmth, delivered with the trust only a child could carry. The images on the screen blurred behind a veil of tears. It could have been them. It should have been them. But something, some unseen hand, some holy whisper, had pulled them back from the edge, not through noise or panic, but through stillness, through a voice that chose a 5-year-old girl to speak what the world could not see. And in that moment, sitting in the hush between what was and what could have been, Emily felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not relief, but awe. Because sometimes the greatest miracles come not in thunder or fire, but in the quietest voice and in the smallest child. In the quiet that followed the shock, when the news had faded and the images on the screen dissolved into static memory, Emily found herself drifting back. Not just to that morning, but to the days before. Little moments, fleeting fragments, pieces that hadn't made sense until now. She sat by the window, the sky outside slowly shifting from silver to soft blue, and let her mind open to what had been buried beneath routine and noise. The signs hadn't just started that morning. They'd come earlier, days earlier, gentle, unassuming, almost invisible, like scattered threads of a warning, too delicate to grasp at the time. She remembered how Lily had woken up twice that week, crying softly in the dark. Not loud sobs, just quiet murmurs that faded as Emily pulled her into her arms. She hadn't thought much of it then. Children dream, children fear shadows. But now, The memory echoed with a new kind of weight. One night, Lily had said something, sleep-tangled words, barely audible. Light, hands, pulling me away from the door. Emily had hushed her gently, thinking it was nonsense, but now those words rang clear, like bells across water. Light hands, as if something, or someone, had already been trying to protect her. Then there were Emily's own dreams, strange fog-laced visions that had crept into her sleep that very same week. She hadn't spoken of them aloud. She'd dismissed them as stress, as exhaustion. But each time she closed her eyes, she found herself on a winding road, cloaked in mist, red brake lights flashing ahead like warnings lost in the haze. She would wake up with her heart racing, always at the moment when the car ahead disappeared into the white. And then, Daniel. Just the day before, he had laughed as he poured coffee and said, "I don't know why, but I feel weird today, like my body knows something my brain missed." Emily had smiled then. They both had. It had been a passing comment, nothing more. But now, looking back, it wasn't nothing. It was everything. The signs had been there, not loud, not frightening, but present, subtle as wind through curtains, soft as footsteps in another room. They hadn't been warnings made of thunder or flashing lights. They were quieter than that. They were graceful, patient, like the divine doesn't demand attention, only stillness. And now that they had lived through what almost was, those signs began to reveal themselves like stars at dusk, one by one. She felt a strange ache in her chest. Part grief, part wonder. Not grief for something lost, but for how close they had come and how unaware they'd been. Lily had seen more clearly than any of them, heard what they had all missed. Because children aren't burdened by doubt. They don't need proof to trust what they feel. Emily closed her eyes and placed a hand over her heart, breathing in the stillness of the room. The signs had always been there. They were just waiting for someone to listen. That evening, as the sky faded into a soft tapestry of rose and ash, Emily stepped out of the house. She needed air, not just to breathe, but to think, to feel something solid beneath her feet after a day that had quietly unraveled everything she thought she understood. The wind was cool against her skin, and the neighborhood was calm, the kind of calm that felt earned, not accidental. Leaves rustled softly in the trees. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The world had returned to its usual rhythm, but Emily hadn't. She wandered aimlessly, her steps leading her down the familiar path near the park. The trees there were beginning to turn, gold, brushing the tips of every branch, as if autumn were painting in whispers. It was quiet, almost sacred. As she rounded the curve near the edge of the trail, she saw him. An elderly man sat alone on a weathered wooden bench, a wool cap pulled gently over his head, his hands folded neatly in his lap. There was something peaceful about him, not just in the way he sat, but in the way the space around him seemed to soften. He looked up and smiled. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he said, his voice kind and deep, like the sound of old books being opened. Emily nodded politely, still caught in the fog of her thoughts. "Yes, it really is." They exchanged a few simple words, the kind strangers share to pass a moment. But just as she was about to continue walking, he turned his gaze to her, and something in his expression shifted, as though he saw more than her face. "Sometimes," he said, softly, "the little ones see clearer than the grown-ups. Their hearts are still open." Emily stopped. The words fell like stones into a still pond, rippling deep. She hadn't told him anything. Not about Lily. Not about the voice. Not about the accident they narrowly escaped. And yet, here he was, speaking as if he'd read the secret folded inside her chest. Her breath caught. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" But the man only smiled again, a gentle, knowing smile, the kind that doesn't ask to be understood. He tipped his hat with quiet grace, rose slowly to his feet, and began walking down the trail, his steps unhurried, almost weightless. Emily watched him as he moved beneath the trees, his figure growing smaller. And then he was gone, just like that. No turn, no final glance, only the rustling leaves in his wake. She stood there for a long time, heart racing not from fear, but from something deeper, something wordless, the kind of feeling you don't describe, you carry. Was he real? Just a kind old man? Or had something, or someone, been sent to remind her, to confirm what her soul already suspected, that Lily's message had never come from nowhere, that the voices of light were real, that what happened that day had not been chance, but protection from something greater? Emily placed a hand over her chest and looked toward the trees where the man had disappeared. The wind passed through the branches gently, like a sigh. And in that moment she understood. Sometimes the divine doesn't arrive with wings or thunder. Sometimes it comes as a stranger who already knows your story. That night, after the dishes were washed and the lights dimmed low, Emily tiptoed into Lily's room one last time. The little girl was fast asleep, her small body curled beneath the blanket, one hand resting gently over her chest, right where she'd said the voices had touched her. Emily lingered in the doorway, watching the slow rise and fall of her daughter's breath. There was a stillness in the room that felt sacred, not the silence of night, but the silence of something present. She closed the door softly and walked back to the kitchen, cradling a warm mug between her palms. The steam rose gently, brushing her face like a breath from another world. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a lullaby. No sirens, no noise, only peace. She sat by the window, and for the first time in a long while, she just let herself feel. The house was the same, the neighborhood, the cup in her hands, but everything felt different now. The day had changed her, not through trauma, but through revelation. There was a quiet truth resting over the world tonight, like the softest blanket. Something invisible had wrapped itself around them, and she had felt it, not just seen it, known it. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, not to forget, but to remember. Every whisper, every flicker of unease, every gentle warning that had tried so patiently to be heard. The dreams, Lily's voice, the stranger in the park, the accident that never came. And then, with no need for candles or scripture or ritual, her soul did something it hadn't done in years. It prayed, not with words rehearsed from childhood, not with a list of fears or needs, but with the simplest offering the human heart can give, gratitude. It rose in her like warmth from the inside out, a whisper without sound, a confession without shame. I know you're there. I saw you today. No one else would have heard it. But something somewhere did, because prayer doesn't always begin with belief. Sometimes it begins with a single moment, when the impossible touches the ordinary. When what could have happened didn't, and something deep within you finally whispers back, I believe you were here. The days moved forward, as they always do. Mornings returned to their gentle rhythm, the rustle of school bags, the clatter of dishes, the hum of Daniel's engine as he left for work. The ordinary pieces of life fell back into place. But the feeling in their home was no longer the same. Something had shifted, quietly, permanently. There was a softness now, as if the air itself had grown more aware, more tender. And woven into the fabric of their days was a new kind of light, subtle but constant, like a thread of gold glimmering through everything they touched. Lily, as always, carried it with the grace only children seem to possess. She didn't speak of the voices every day, nor did she seem to dwell on what had happened. But now and then, while she colored at the kitchen table or played quietly in the yard, she would mention her light friends in passing. "They sit with me when I draw," she said once, matter of fact. "They like when I use the yellow crayon." Or, "They hum songs when I'm sleepy." Emily listened carefully. She never pressed, never asked too much. But each time Lily spoke, it felt like hearing a secret pass through the veil. Soft, pure, unfiltered. Not stories, not inventions, just truth. Emily, too, had begun to change. She started journaling again, not just out of habit, but out of reverence. She wrote down her dreams, her passing thoughts, the moments when her heart tugged for no reason at all. She stopped brushing things off as coincidences. She began paying attention to the quiet, to her intuition, to the voice that doesn't shout, but whispers. The trip they had once planned so casually, the one they'd postponed without understanding why, was finally rescheduled for November. There was no resistance this time, no unease, just a quiet knowing that the moment was right. And when they arrived in Seattle, greeted by Daniel's sister with open arms and a tearful embrace, it didn't feel like a vacation. It felt like destiny finding its timing. They sat together around the fireplace that night, family, laughter, warmth, and Emily found herself watching the flames, her heart full but calm. She thought back to that October morning, to Lily's voice, to the stranger on the bench, and she smiled, because life had returned to normal, but it was a new kind of normal, one that held space for mystery, one that honored the unseen. They hadn't just been spared, they had been shown, and from that day forward, they lived not in fear of what might happen, but in gratitude for the quiet hand that had already moved through their lives, before they even knew to ask. Time moved gently, as it always does. Seasons came and went. Lily grew taller, braver, full of questions about the stars, the moon, and how the clouds always seemed to know when to hide the sun. And like all children, she slowly began to forget. Not entirely. Not in the way a person forgets a birthday or the name of a street, but in that soft way memories blur when the world begins asking you to grow up and stop believing in things you can't explain. Her drawings changed. Her quiet references to light friends faded. Eventually, she stopped speaking of that morning altogether. But Emily remembered. She remembered everything. She remembered the way the hallway had gone still, as if time itself were waiting to see what she would do. She remembered her daughter's voice, so serene it felt borrowed from another world. She remembered the moment the phone rang and her breath caught in her throat, as if the universe had exhaled a secret only she had been meant to hear. And above all, she remembered the feeling, not fear, not shock, but something deeper. That sacred ache of knowing you've been touched by something far greater than yourself. She never called it a miracle. She didn't try to name it. She never needed to. But every now and then, in the quiet corners of her life, standing at the sink as sunlight spilled across the counter, walking alone in the cool of the evening, lying awake beneath a sky heavy with stars, she would close her eyes, just for a moment, and listen, not for thunder, not for voices in the sky, but for the quiet tug. The shift in the air, the whisper at the edge of thought, because once you've heard it, truly heard it, you never forget the sound of a warning wrapped in love. Emily often found herself telling close friends, usually over tea or late-night phone calls. Sometimes the message doesn't come with flashing lights. Sometimes it's a whisper through the soul of a child. Most nodded politely. Some believed, some didn't. But that didn't matter, because she hadn't needed anyone else to see it. She had felt it. She had lived it, and it had changed the way she moved through the world. She stopped rushing decisions. She started trusting her dreams more. She listened, really listened, when something deep inside pulled her in a new direction. And when life grew uncertain, as it always does, she would pause, close her eyes, and ask silently, "If you're still near, please guide me." No matter how much time passed, the memory of that October morning lived in her, not like a story, but like a sacred ember glowing quietly, reminding her that there are things we cannot see and voices we cannot name, working on our behalf when we least expect it. And maybe that's the lesson, that the greatest signs are not always loud, they're not always dramatic, they don't always demand our attention. Sometimes they wait for us to notice them. A sudden dream, a child's quiet warning, a stranger with kind eyes who speaks a sentence you didn't know you needed to hear, a delayed departure that saves your life. Maybe it's all chance, maybe it's all divine, or maybe it's the place in between, that sacred silence between coincidence and faith, right where most miracles happen. Have you ever experienced a sign like this? Do you believe it was just coincidence or something greater? What would you have done if it had been your child who spoke those words? Do you think angels are guiding us, even when we don't notice? If your heart is whispering right now, even just a little, that this story mattered, that it meant something, then maybe that whisper is a sign too. If this story touched your heart, don't let these signs go unnoticed. Subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us to hear more real stories of faith, mystery, and the moments when life whispers. Just in time. Thank you for staying until the end. But remember, there are stories that aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be felt. We'll see you in the next one, if you're still listening.